They told her the child's blood was failing. They did not tell her the private wing was guarded by men who carried silence like a weapon. They did not tell her that the girl's father had made 3 city officials vanish before breakfast that same week. And they certainly did not tell her that on a rain-soaked Tuesday in Seoul, a 5-year-old who hadn't spoken in 2 years would reach out with a trembling hand, grip a broke nurse from Detroit like she was the last solid thing in the world, and whisper the one word that would bring the most dangerous man in South Korea to his knees.
Mommy.
Ever walk into that house, or the only one brave enough to see what everyone else was too scared to look at? If you're the kind of person who believes love can walk into the coldest room and still find something worth saving, you're exactly who this story was written for. Hit subscribe, turn on that bell, and let's build this family together, one story at a time. Like this video if you already feel it in your chest. Share it with someone who needs a good cry tonight. Now settle in. This one starts in the rain. The rain hadn't stopped since Incheon. Maya Lincoln pressed her forehead against the cool window of the black sedan as it climbed through the hills of Seongbuk-dong, watching the city lights blur into streaks of gold and red behind the glass. 22 hours of travel sat in her bones like wet cement. Somewhere behind her, for 1,000 miles away, her mother's clinic sat dark with a foreclosure notice taped to the door, and somewhere ahead of her, past iron gates that looked like they belonged to a fortress instead of a home, a dying child was waiting for a stranger to save her. The car stopped. The gates didn't just open. They retracted, silent and mechanical, swallowing the vehicle into a courtyard lit by soft amber lanterns and lined with black stone. The house itself rose out of the mist like something carved rather than built, all sharp modern lines wrapped around a traditional bones, glass and steel married to dark wood. It was beautiful. It was also, Maya thought as she stepped out and felt eyes she couldn't see settle on her from somewhere in the shadows of the wall, absolutely terrifying. A woman was waiting at the top of the stone steps. She was small, silver-haired, dressed in an immaculate charcoal hanbok, her hands folded in front of her like a soldier at rest. Her face gave away nothing. Ms. Lincoln. Her English was precise, clipped, carrying the weight of someone who had learned it out of necessity rather than love. I am Eun-ji. I manage this household. Maya's fine. Maya extended a hand. The older woman looked at it for a beat too long before shaking it once, briskly, and turning toward the door. Walk with me. There are things you should understand before you meet the child. Maya followed her through a foyer that smelled of sandalwood and something colder underneath it. Antiseptic, maybe, or the particular sterile hush of money that didn't want to be noticed. Eun-ji's low heels clicked against the marble in a rhythm that felt almost like a warning. You are the fourth, the housekeeper said without turning around. The fourth what? Private nurse. She stopped at the base of a wide staircase, finally turning to face Maya directly. Up close, her eyes were sharp, tired, and Maya realized with a small jolt, afraid, though carefully buried. The first lasted 4 days. The second, too. The third made it to day 6 before she ran out the service entrance at 3 in the morning without her coat. Maya kept her voice level. Ran from what? The girl. No. Eun-ji's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. From his house. From what happens in it when the sun goes down. She let that sit in the air, heavy and unfinished, and Maya understood immediately that no further explanation would be offered. Not yet, maybe not ever. You will hear things at night, Ms. Lincoln. Cars in the drive that should not be there. Voices that do not belong to guests. I'm telling you now, once, so you are not foolish enough to go looking for them. Your patient is upstairs. Everything else in this house is not your concern. And if you value your safety, you will make certain it stays that way. It should have scared her off right there. Maya thought about the wire transfer sitting in her account back home. 6 figures that would erase her mother's debt in a single signature. And she thought about the desperate voice on the other end of the recruiting call, describing a 5-year-old with a blood disease and eyes that hadn't cried in months because she'd stopped feeling anything at all. She thought about all the reasons a sane woman would turn around and ask the driver to take her straight back to the airport. Instead, she said, "Take me to her." Something flickered across Young-sik's face. Not quite approval, but close to it, before she turned and led the way up. The medical suite occupied the entire east corner of the second floor, and it was, Maya had to admit, more sophisticated than half the ICUs she'd worked in back in Detroit. Bedside monitors gleamed in soft blue standby light. An entire wall was given over to a climate-controlled pharmaceutical cabinet, its glass door fogged faintly with cold. Beyond the equipment, positioned to catch the last gray light coming through floor-to-ceiling windows, sat a hospital bed dressed in soft ivory linens that looked almost apologetic against all the chrome and glass surrounding it. And in the center of that bed, small enough to nearly disappear into the pillows, sat a little girl. She wasn't crying. She wasn't watching cartoons on the tablet, propped uselessly on the rolling table beside her, wasn't playing with the plush one-eared rabbit tucked against her side. She was simply sitting, spine straight, hands folded on top of the blanket exactly the way Young-sik had been folded downstairs, staring at a fixed point on the wall like she was waiting for something to be over. A pale yellow knit beanie sat crooked on her head, and beneath it her face was thin, translucent almost, the particular pallor of a body that had been fighting itself for far too long. "Eun-ji," Young-sik said gently, her whole demeanor shifting the moment she crossed into the child's line of sight, softer, warmer, years falling away from her voice. "This is Maya. She's going to take care of you now." The girl didn't look at either of them. She blinked, slow and deliberate, and returned her gaze to the wall. "She has not spoken in 2 years," Young-sik said quietly, from Maya's ears only. "Not since her mother. The doctors say there is nothing wrong with her voice. Only with everything else." She smoothed a non-existent wrinkle from the blanket, lingering a moment longer than duty required, before straightening and stepping back into her guarded posture. "I will have your things brought up. Dinner will be sent to the suite. Master Y will want to speak with you in the morning." A pause. "Do not be late. He does not tolerate lateness in anyone." She left. Maya stood alone in the doorway of the golden cage, looking at a child who had built a silence so complete it had become its own kind of armor, and felt something in her chest, exhausted, broke for 1,000 miles from home, quietly began to catch fire. She didn't touch the monitors first. She pulled a chair to the far side of the bed, sat down at Eun-ji's eye level instead of looming over her, and simply said, "Hi, I like your rabbit. Does he have a name?" Silence. But this time, Maya noticed the girl's fingers twitched just slightly against the rabbit's worn ear. It was a start. Ye-jun did not stand when she entered the study the next morning. He didn't need to. Everything about the room, the black lacquered desk, the wall of law books that Maya suspected had never once been opened for legal advice, the single orchid arranged with surgical precision on the windowsill, was built to make visitors feel they had already lost before a word was spoken. He was younger than she'd expected, though nothing about him suggested youth. Dark hair combed back without a strand out of place, a black shirt open at the collar beneath a suit jacket cut close enough to move in a fight, and eyes that studied her with the flat, unhurried patience of a man accustomed to people trembling in this exact chair. He didn't offer coffee. He didn't offer a smile. "Ms. Lincoln." He said her name like he was testing its weight. "You understand what you're being paid for. To keep your daughter alive." "To keep her alive," he agreed, sliding a folder across the desk without looking away from her face, "and to see nothing, hear nothing, and repeat nothing of what happens beyond the walls of that medical wing. The contract is generous. Generous enough that your family's clinic problem," a small, deliberate pause, letting her feel exactly how much he already knew about her life, "will no longer exist by the end of the week, should you sign it." Maya didn't reach for the folder. "You had someone dig into my finances before I even landed. I dig into everyone. No apology in it. It is how men in my position stay alive. You should be grateful I found something useful enough to offer, instead of something that would have kept you off this plane entirely." She let that threat sit there, unclaimed, refusing to give him the reaction he was fishing for. Instead, she leaned forward and folded her hands on the edge of his desk, mirroring his own posture back at him. I'll sign your NDA. I'll keep every secret this house is hiding, because that's not my business and it's not why I'm here. But I have terms too, Mr. Y, and they're not negotiable. She counted them off, unhurried. No weapons in the medical wing. Not on you, not on your men, not leaned against a wall just in case. No one comes into that suite in clothes that have blood on them, fresh or otherwise. I don't care whose blood it is or what business you were conducting when it got there. And when I am with your daughter, I am the only authority in that room. Not you. Me. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not quite surprised, because Maya suspected very little surprise this man anymore, but a recalibration. The look of someone quietly revising an estimate upward. You are aware of who you are speaking to. I'm aware I'm speaking to a father whose daughter hasn't said a word in 2 years, and I'm the person he flew across the world because nobody else could fix that. She held his gaze and did not blink first. You can find someone more obedient. You already have 3 times, and they lasted less than a week because obedient doesn't heal anybody. If you want your daughter to get better, you need somebody willing to tell you no. The silence stretched long enough that Maya heard the faint hum of the climate system somewhere in the walls. Then, slowly, Ye-jun leaned back in his chair, and something that wasn't quite a smile moved at the corner of his mouth. No weapons, he said. No blood. Agreed. He slid the folder another inch toward her. You have terms, Ms. Lincoln. I respect terms. I have very little patience for people who don't have any. She signed. Neither of them said another word about what waited behind the doors of the East Wing at night. But as she left the study, Maya felt his eyes on her back the entire way down the hall, and understood, with the particular clarity of a woman who had just made a very dangerous man reconsider her, that something had shifted between them that neither of them would name yet. It took her 4 days to understand why Eun-ji flinched every time a nurse, the last one, weeks ago according to the chart, had lifted a stethoscope toward her chest. It wasn't the instrument. It was the cold. Every piece of metal in that gleaming suite had been sterilized to a temperature that stung on contact, and for a child who had spent 2 years being prodded, scanned, and pierced by machines in rooms that smelled like bleach, cold metal had become a language of dread. So Maya changed the language. She warmed the stethoscope bell in her closed palm for a full minute before it ever touched skin. She dimmed the overhead lights and brought in a small lamp with a warm amber shade from her own suitcase, angling it so it fell like candlelight instead of clinical fluorescence. She stopped narrating procedures in flat medical terms and started talking instead about anything, about nothing, about the sound Detroit made in the summer when the block parties spilled out onto Woodward Avenue, about her grandmother's peach cobbler, about a city that had been knocked down more times than anyone could count and had gotten up anyway, every single time, because that was what home did. Eun-ji never answered, but she started watching. Her eyes, which had spent 4 days fixed on that one point on the wall, began following Maya around the room instead. On the 5th evening, Maya was drawing her blood, gently, slowly, still talking, this time about the lake her family used to drive out to when she was small, when Eun-ji's small hand, unprompted, reached out and closed weakly around Maya's wrist. Maya went still. She didn't pull away, didn't gasp, didn't do anything that might break whatever fragile thread had just been strung between them. She simply lowered her voice and kept talking, softer now, and let the girl hold on. You don't have to be scared, Maya murmured, setting the vial aside without looking away from her. I've got you. I'm not going anywhere. Eun-ji's lips parted. For a moment, nothing came out at all, just a faint tremor of breath catching in a throat that had forgotten how to shape words. And then, so quiet it was barely more than an exhale, so fragile Maya would have missed it if she hadn't been leaning in close. Mommy, stay. The room seemed to stop breathing along with her. Neither of them heard the study door open down the hall, or the footsteps that had grown accustomed, over 5 days, to pausing just outside the medical suite each evening to listen for the sound of a daughter he'd been told might never speak again. But they both heard the sound that came after, a sharp, heavy thud, leather and metal striking marble, as Ye-jun's briefcase slipped from fingers that had gone numb, and the most feared man in Seoul stood frozen in the doorway of his daughter's sick room with his face utterly, helplessly undone. It was 2 nights later, well past midnight, when Maya learned exactly what Eun-ji had been warning her about. Eun-ji had finally drifted off, her small hand still loosely curled around the worn ear of a rabbit, and Maya slipped out to the supply closet at the end of the east wing to restock sterile water for the overnight line. The hallway was dim, lit only by recessed floor lighting, and she was 3 steps past a door she'd never seen open before when she heard it. A voice, low and controlled, asking a question in Korean that needed no translation to understand the shape of it. A second voice, higher, breaking. And beneath both of them, a third sound, wet and pained, that made every instinct honed by a decade in trauma medicine go cold and still. The door wasn't fully latched. Maya knew she should keep walking. Instead, her feet stopped, and through the gap, she saw him. Ye-jun stood with his jacket removed, sleeves rolled with clinical precision, flanked by 2 men she recognized from the estate's perimeter. The broad, silent one who never seemed to blink, and the leaner one with the calm, assessing eyes of someone who saw 6 moves ahead in every room he entered. A fourth man was bound to a chair between them, his face a ruin of purpling bruises, his breathing ragged and shallow in a way Maya's medical training identified immediately as dangerously close to a punctured lung. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She stood frozen in the dark hallway with her cart of sterile water, and watched Ye-jun ask one more question in a voice utterly without heat, without rage, just terrible, patient certainty, before the door swung the rest of the way open and his eyes found hers over the captive's bowed head. For one endless second, nobody moved. Chun-ho, gun. Ye-jun's voice didn't rise, but the 2 men peeled away from the chair instantly, vanishing further into the room, out of sight. Give us the hallway. Maya should have run. Every rational cell in her body told her to run. Instead, she stood her ground as he crossed to her, closing the door behind him with a soft click that somehow felt louder than a slam, and she made herself look him directly in the eye instead of at the blood on his forearms. You shouldn't have seen that, he said. Not an apology. A statement of fact delivered flat. No, Maya agreed. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. I shouldn't have. But I did, and I'm not going to pretend I didn't, and I'm not running out your service entrance at 3 in the morning either, if that's what you're waiting for. She lifted her chin. I don't care what that man did. I don't care what you are out there in whatever world you live in when you're not in that nursery, reading her stories in a voice you think I can't hear through the wall. That's not my business. It's not why I'm in this house. Then why? He asked quietly. Are you still standing here? Because your daughter's blood counts are stabilizing for the first time in 6 months, and I'm not about to walk away from that, because you're a monster in every room except hers. She held his gaze, unflinching, though her pulse hammered hard enough that she was certain he could see it in her throat. I made you a promise in your study. No blood in the medical wing. I intend to keep it. What you do everywhere else in this house, that's yours. Eun-ji is mine. Don't ever let what I just saw walk through her door. Something moved behind his eyes. Not the cold calculation she'd grown used to, but something rawer, more exposed, a man being seen fully for the first time by someone who hadn't fled at the sight of it. You're not afraid of me. I'm terrified of you, Maya said honestly. I'm just more afraid of what happens to that little girl if I let it stop me. He studied her for a long moment in the low light, blood drying on his knuckles, and then, unexpectedly, he stepped back and inclined his head. The smallest fraction of a bow, the kind of gesture Maya suspected he had not offered a living soul in a very long time. Go back to her, he said quietly. I'll have the water sent up. She went. She didn't look back, though she felt his eyes on her the entire length of the hallway, and she didn't sleep again that night. Not from fear exactly, but from the unsettling recognition that the man she should have run from was becoming, slowly and against every instinct she owned, someone she was starting to understand. After that night, something in the house shifted, quiet and unspoken. Ye-jun began appearing in the nursery earlier each evening. First for 10 minutes, murmured questions about lab values he barely understood, and then, gradually for an hour, then 2, sitting in the chair across from Maya's with a stiffness that slowly, night by night, began to ease out of his shoulders. He brought Eun-ji drawing supplies without being asked. He brought Maya, on the 9th night, a paper cup of coffee that made her laugh out loud for the first time since she'd landed in Seoul. A caramel oat milk latte, exact to her order, procured, she later learned, because he'd had Kwok-gun quietly trace her old coffee shop loyalty account back in Detroit. "You had someone hack a coffee shop," she said, half scandalized, wrapping both hands around the warm cup. "I had someone research," he corrected. And there, for one unguarded second, was something that might, in another life, have been the beginning of a smile. He was terrible at reading storybooks. Truly, spectacularly terrible, stumbling through the cadence of picture books meant for 5-year-olds with the flat, uncertain delivery of a man far more comfortable issuing orders than performing whimsy, doing voices that made Eun-ji giggle. A sound that still made Maya's chest ache every single time she heard it, precious and new. Not because they were good, but because they were so obviously, endearingly bad. Maya found herself correcting his pronunciation, leaning across the narrow gap between their chairs to point at the page, and more than once caught herself simply watching him instead of the book. The furrow of concentration between his brows, the careful, clumsy way this dangerous man handled a paperback like it might shatter. "You're better at this than you think," she told him one night, after he'd finished a particularly disastrous rendition of a book about a lonely dragon. "I am terrible at this," he said, without heat, closing the book. "But she laughs. So I will continue being terrible." Maya looked at him then, really looked past the tailored suit and the ice in his reputation, and saw simply a man trying, clumsily and completely, to become someone worth his daughter's newfound voice. It undid something in her she hadn't planned on losing. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for the coffee." "Thank you," he said, just as quietly, his eyes not leaving hers, "for the word she said to you last week. I have not heard her voice in 2 years, Ms. Lincoln. I did not know how much silence had been living in this house until you started filling it." The lamp between them cast its warm amber light across the small space, across the sleeping child between them, across two people who had started this arrangement as employer and stranger and were, slowly, without either of them quite naming it, becoming something far more dangerous and far more tender than either had bargained for. Outside, beyond the glass, the rain had finally stopped over Seongbuk-dong. Inside, for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, something in that golden cage had begun, quietly, to feel like home. The alarm on Eun-ji's monitor tore through the quiet at 4:47 in the morning. Maya was out of the cot in the corner of the suite before she was fully awake, years of ICU muscle memory carrying her across the room faster than conscious thought. Eun-ji's small body had gone rigid, then limp, her oxygen saturation collapsing in a freefall that no 5-year-old's number should ever hit, her lips taking on a bluish cast under the amber lamp. Maya had never bothered to switch back to the harsh overheads. "Talk to me, baby, stay with me." Maya's hands moved on instinct. Oxygen mask for line checked, vitals called out loud to no one because there was no one else in the room yet, just her and a child crashing in front of her eyes. She hit the emergency line to the house medical staff with one hand while adjusting the flow rate with the other, and within 90 seconds the suite was full of people, full of light, full of the controlled chaos of a team, stabilizing a patient back from the edge of something that should never have happened this fast, this violently, with no warning at all. By the time Eun-ji's numbers leveled out, thin, fragile, but climbing, the sun was up, and Maya had not stopped shaking. It didn't make sense. She'd charted the girls' counts herself the evening before. Trending up, steady, the best numbers in 6 months. A crash like this didn't happen out of nowhere, not this fast, not this severe. Maya pulled the overnight labs the moment they came back and sat alone in the small side office off the medical suite, scrolling through numbers that refused to add up no matter how many times she recalculated them. The immunotherapy markers were wrong. Not just off. Inverted, showing a chemical signature that had no business being anywhere near a pediatric leukemia protocol. Maya had spent a decade reading blood work. She knew the difference between a body failing and a body being pushed to fail, and what she was looking at cross-referenced against 3 prior treatment cycles that all showed the same quiet, deliberate anomaly buried in the margins was sabotage. Someone had been poisoning this child in small, careful doses, dressed up to look like disease progression. Her hands were cold on the keyboard. She needed to get this to Ye-jun. Now, she was 3 steps into the hallway when a shadow detached itself from the alcove near the stairwell. Ki-nam had a way of smiling that never once reached anywhere near his eyes. Maya had met him twice in passing. Ye-jun's second, always immaculate, always 2 steps behind his boss with the studied patience of a man who'd been waiting a very long time for something. He stood in front of her now with his hands folded, blocking the corridor with an ease that made it clear he wasn't there by accident. "Ms. Lincoln, you look unwell." His English was flawless, unhurried. "A difficult night, I understand. I need to get past you." Maya kept her voice level, even as her pulse spiked hard against her ribs. In a moment, he tilted his head, studying her the way she imagined he studied ledgers, for weaknesses, for leverage. "You are, I think, a very clever woman. Clever enough to have found something in those lab reports you're holding so tightly." His eyes flicked down to the folder in her hand, then back up. "I would think very carefully about what you plan to do with it." Maya's blood went to ice. Is that a threat? His advice? He stepped closer, and the temperature of his voice dropped into something with no warmth left in it all. "The girl's condition is a medical matter. Nothing more. If you go to Ye-jun with wild theories, you will destabilize a man who is already balanced on a knife's edge at the worst possible moment for this organization. That would be unwise. For the child's care. A pause, deliberate, surgical. And for your continued good health, Ms. Lincoln. Seoul is a very large city. It would be a shame if a woman so far from home simply became difficult to find." He straightened his cuffs, unhurried, and walked past her down the corridor as though he'd merely stopped to comment on the weather, leaving Maya standing frozen with a folder of evidence clutched to her chest and a fear settling cold and absolute into her stomach. Not fear for herself, but the sharper, more dangerous fear of a woman who now understood exactly how far someone was willing to go to keep a 5-year-old sick. She didn't run. She waited until dark, until she was certain Ki-nam's schedule had him off the estate grounds entirely. Confirmed quietly through O.M. Yong-sik's careful network of household staff who trusted no one but watched everyone. Then she slipped an old analog recorder, the kind with no wireless signal to intercept, borrowed from the housekeeper's late husband's belongings, the kind Ki-nam's men would never think to sweep for, into her scrub pocket, and knocked on the study door. Ye-jun looked up from his desk, and whatever he saw on her face made him rise immediately. "What's happened?" Maya set the folder down and spread the lab reports across his desk, forcing her voice to stay clinical, precise, because if she let it shake even once she'd lose her nerve. Eun-ji's crash wasn't disease progression. Somebody has been introducing synthetic cellular inhibitors into her immunotherapy for at least 3 cycles. It's subtle, dressed up to look like treatment failure, but it's not failure. It's sabotage. She let that land before continuing, watching the color drain from his face. And this afternoon, Ki-nam cornered me in the hallway and told me, very politely, that if I brought this to you, I would disappear. The study went utterly silent. When Ye-jun spoke again, his voice had dropped into something Maya had never heard from him before. Not the cold precision of the boardroom, not the tenderness of the nursery, but something scraped raw and dangerous underneath both. "Say that again." She did. She told him everything. The numbers, the threat, the careful, surgical cruelty in Ki-nam's smile, and watched a man who had built an empire on control lose every ounce of it in real time. His hand came down flat on the desk hard enough to rattle the orchid on the windowsill. And for one terrible moment Maya thought he might tear the room apart with his bare hands. 2 years, he said low and shaking. 2 years I have watched my daughter die by inches, and it was he did this. In my own house. To my child. His voice cracked on the last word. And the crack was worse than the fury, because it was the sound of a father finally understanding the true shape of his grief. Maya crossed the room and put both hands flat against his chest, not to restrain him, but to anchor him, the way she'd learned to anchor family members in a trauma bay who were one heartbeat from shattering. "I need you here," she said firmly. "Not out there hunting him down tonight in a rage that gets you killed. I need the man who outthinks people, not the man who just breaks things. We do this smart, or we don't get her cured and keep you alive to see it." She held his gaze until she felt some of the wildness in him settle, banked but not extinguished. "I have a recorder. I have the labs. What I don't have is proof of who's falsifying the registry on his end. And I think I know who that is." It took one phone call and 40 minutes of Kwok-gun's quiet, methodical digging to confirm it. Dr. No To-hyun, the estate's contracted research physician, had received 3 off-book transfers matching Ki-nam's known shell accounts, timed precisely with each corrupted treatment cycle. Maya watched Ye-jun go very still and very cold as the picture assembled itself completely. His own physician, bribed, falsifying the very registry meant to save his daughter's life, while his most trusted lieutenant smiled at his shoulder every single day. "He wanted me weak," Ye-jun said quietly, staring at the evidence spread across his desk. "Bleeding money on failed treatments, distracted, grieving. An easy transition for him to take everything out from under me while I was too broken to notice." He looked up at Maya, and something had shifted permanently behind his eyes. Grief burned down into something harder, clearer, purposeful. He is going to regret ever touching her. "Then let's make sure he regrets it in a way that actually works," Maya said. "You handle him. I'll handle her cure, because Ki-nam thinks he's the only one holding leverage, and he's wrong." 2 days later, Ki-nam stopped pretending. It happened fast, the way these things apparently always did. Ye-jun had told her once that the quiet ones broke loudest when they finally moved. Maya woke to Young-sik's hand on her shoulder before dawn, the older woman's face drawn tight with an urgency that needed no translation. "The estate is locked down. Come, quickly." By the time Maya reached the main hall, the household had transformed. Guards she recognized moved with sharpened purpose along the perimeter windows. 2 men she didn't know, Yan Ying-min and Sung-min, introduced to her in clipped sentences as the men who would not leave her or Eun-ji's side until this was over, flanked the base of the stairs. And Ye-jun stood in the center of it all in a plain black jacket, utterly composed, listening to Kwok-gun read out terms over a secure line with the flat calm of a man who had already decided how this would end. Ki-nam's demand was simple and absolute. Full banking codes, full control of the syndicate's financial architecture, transferred within 6 hours, or the clean antidote line he claimed to be holding, the only viable donor match left in Ki-nam's version of events, would vanish along with any hope of Eun-ji's cure. "He thinks he holds every card," Ye-jun said quietly, once the line went dead. He looked at Maya, something steady and fierce passing between them. "He does not know what you found in Detroit." Maya had spent the last 2 nights buried in Eun-ji's mother's old medical files, shipped over at her request from a storage unit outside Detroit, searching for anything that might give them a second option Ki-nam didn't control. She'd found it just past midnight. A single line in an international donor registry, a cord blood unit cross-registered under a pseudonym years ago, quietly, carefully, by a mother who it seemed had never fully trusted the medical system surrounding her daughter's birth. A perfect genetic match, completely untouched by Ki-nam's corruption, sitting safely outside Korea entirely. "He doesn't know," Maya confirmed. "And he's not going to until it's already done." Ye-jun nodded once, and something settled into place between them. A plan built in whispers over the last 48 hours, medical and tactical woven together so tightly neither could succeed without the other. He would give Ki-nam exactly what he wanted to see. A boss walking calmly into a trap, alone, ready to sign everything away. Chun-ho and Kwok-gun were already inside the walls of Ki-nam's compound by the river, embedded for days as maintenance staff no one had thought twice about, waiting for the signal to seize control from within before a single shot was fired from outside. And back here, behind locked gates and armed men, Maya would secure the true cure the moment the compound went dark. He cupped Maya's face in both hands before he left, his forehead resting briefly against hers, a wordless promise neither of them dared say out loud in case saying it made losing it possible. Then he was gone, black car, pulling through the gates into the gray morning light, and Maya turned back toward the stairs, toward the little girl who needed her steady more than anything else in the world right now. The Han River facility sat lit up against the dark water like something innocent, glass and steel glowing warm and welcoming from the outside. Ye-jun walked through its front doors alone, unarmed by appearance, his face arranged into the perfect mask of a defeated man. Kinam met him in the central lab, flanked by 6 guards, standing beside Dr. To-hyun's terrified, sweating form near a bank of refrigerated units that housed what Kinam believed was the last uncorrupted piece of leverage in Seoul. "You came alone," Kinam said, almost disappointed. "I expected more fight in you. I want my daughter to live." Ye-jun's voice was flat, hollow, exactly as broken as Kinam needed it to sound. "Give me the codes to input. I'll sign everything." Kinam's smile spread slow and satisfied, savoring the moment 2 decades of patient scheming finally paid out. He never noticed Pak Chun-ho step through the maintenance door behind his own guards until the man was already among them, moving with brutal, silent efficiency. He never noticed Kwok Gun seize the facility's central control room until every camera feed Kinam trusted went dark simultaneously, every locked door in the building releasing at once, every one of his men suddenly cut off from each other and from him. "You seized nothing," Ye-jun said quietly, and for the first time, something like fear crossed Kinam's face. "You held a compound you never actually controlled. Chun-ho and Gun have been inside these walls for 4 days. Your guards work for me now, but they're already on the floor." The confrontation that followed was fast, decisive, and utterly without mercy, the kind of reckoning 2 years of buried grief and betrayal demanded. Dr. To-hyun collapsed into confession before a single hand was raised against him, spilling every detail of the falsified registry, every bribe, every corrupted cycle, in a desperate bid to save himself. Kinam, cornered and finally out of leverage, out of allies, out of time, met Ye-jun's eyes one final moment, and found no mercy waiting there at all. Ye-jun ensured, with the same cold precision that had built his empire, that the man who had poisoned his daughter would never threaten anyone again. Back at the estate, the moment Kwok Gun's confirmation came through, compound secured, threat eliminated, corrupted registry seized as evidence, Maya was already moving. The international donor unit had been couriered in under diplomatic secrecy 2 days prior on Ye-jun's quiet orders, sitting ready in cold storage exactly where she'd insisted it wait. She worked with O.M. Young-sik at her side and the estate's remaining medical staff around her, verifying, cross-checking, refusing to breathe easy until every marker confirmed what she already knew in her bones. A clean match, untouched, exactly what Eun-ji's real mother had quietly protected years before she'd ever known her daughter would need it. By the time Ye-jun walked back through the estate gates at dusk, jacket gone, exhaustion etched into every line of his face, Eun-ji was already receiving the true infusion. Her small hand curled once more around her worn rabbit. Maya seated beside her bed exactly where she'd promised she'd stay. He didn't say anything when he entered the room. He simply crossed to the bed, sank into the chair on Eun-ji's other side, and reached across the small sleeping body to find Maya's hand, holding on like a man who had finally, after 2 long years, allowed himself to believe in an ending that didn't end in loss. 3 months later, the garden at Seongbuk-dong bore no resemblance to the sterile stone courtyard Maya had first walked through in the rain. Sunflowers filled every bed along the property's edge, tall and impossibly bright, turning their faces toward a clean blue sky as a little girl in a yellow sundress tore barefoot through the rows of them. Dark hair grown back thick and shining, cheeks full and flushed with the particular color of a child who was, finally, simply healthy. Eun-ji laughed, loud, unguarded, constant now, the sound Maya suspected she would never stop being grateful for as long as she lived, and dove into the flowers with her arms outstretched like she meant to hug every single one. Ye-jun stood near the garden's stone archway in a simple ivory suit that bore no resemblance to the sharp black armor Maya had first seen him in. Syndicate dissolved and reformed months ago into a legitimate foundation for pediatric medical research, its papers signed and witnessed by Soo Byung-chul himself, the elder statesman lending his blessing to a man finally choosing peace over power. Ye-jun's eyes, when they found Maya walking toward him down the sunflower-lined path in a simple white dress, held none of the ice that had first greeted her in his study. Only warmth, only certainty. The ceremony was small, exactly as they'd wanted. O.M. Young-sik dabbing at her eyes despite her best efforts at composure. Chun-ho and Kwak-gun standing at quiet, proud attention. Yan-young-min and Sung-min grinning like men who'd earned the right to simply enjoy a good day for once. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, only sunflowers answered, swaying gently in the afternoon breeze. Eun-ji stood between them as they exchanged their vows, small hands gripping tightly to each of theirs, refusing to let go through the entire ceremony, through the kiss, through the applause that rose warm and full around the garden. When it was finally, completely done, she threw both arms up, one hand still locked in Maya's, the other in her father's, and shouted with the full, unrestrained joy of a girl who had once gone 2 years without a single word to say. "My forever family is whole." Maya laughed through sudden tears, lifting Eun-ji up onto her hip as Ye-jun wrapped both of them into his arms, and standing there in a garden that had once been cold stone and was now nothing but sunflowers and sunlight and the sound of a little girl's endless laughter. Maya understood that every broken, exhausted mile of the journey that had brought her here had led, against every possible odd, exactly where she was always meant to be.